Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Winnetka Village Council regular meeting for March 7th, 2023. I'd like to call the meeting to order, ask everybody to mute or turn off your cell phones or other electronic devices. And I'll ask Rob to do a roll call for attendance.
Certainly. Trustee Apatow? Here. Trustee Kripe? Here. Trustee Handler?
Here.
Trustee Dearborn?
Here.
Trustee Dahlman?
Here.
President Rins.
Here. Okay, Pledge of Allegiance. I will lead us this evening in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Trustee Dearborn has provided the required notice that he is unable to attend tonight's meeting due to work obligations. Our rules provide that Trustee Dearborn may participate remotely unless two-thirds of the board objects. Is there any objection?
No.
Hearing none, Trustee Dearborn may now participate remotely, fully in the meeting, and the minutes should so reflect. We'll move forward, and item 3 is the quorum. Rob, you want to go ahead and check quorum?
2 meetings left in March, the 14th, Tina, I have used being out. March 14th is a study session for next week. Does that look okay?
Yeah.
And then Tuesday, March 21st.
It may be an issue for me, I'll let you know by
Okay.
this week.
All right. And then the first meeting in April was noticed with the annual meeting notice to be on Monday, the 3rd. That is due to Tuesday being an election, and usually we would move it to a Thursday, but that's a holiday, religious holiday. So we pre-scheduled that for Monday, April 3rd.
Monday, April 3rd.
Yeah. So if you want to check your calendars, and
I'll be here, and that might be an issue.
might be,
Yeah,
okay.
that may be out.
Yeah, this is an odd one just by the way the dates fell, but this was pre-noticed when we approved the annual meetings notice in, I believe, November, December.
Are we prohibited from meeting on election day? Is that
It's been our practice not to do that.
Okay, we good there, Rob?
Yep, thank you.
Excuse me. Okay, public comment. This is the time of the evening where anyone in the audience who wants to address village council on an item that is not on the agenda is welcome to come up here. We will also open public comment for items that are on the consent agenda if anybody wishes to speak to one of the items on the consent agenda.
What is the consent?
That means that we vote on all, who asked the question? I'm sorry. Oh, that's when we vote on a stack of items all at one time, Katie. They're usually pro forma items that, are paying a bill or
Second meeting.
second meetings, thanks, all that stuff. So we've been using the consent agenda for about 15 years now. So go ahead, Ted.
Okay, hi, Ted Winchenko. Okay, a couple things. So I missed the meeting about the solar. So it's great, gonna increase the limit, it's good, getting rid of the insurance requirement, which never made much sense. It's still disappointing though that in the writing documentation, although I know that this may not be said explicitly, in the writing documentation, they call it net metering. Winnetka has never had net metering. Was worse before, it's better now. I understand that there was no interest in changing it. It's disappointing. As I've said multiple times, taxes and what the government does should be designed to push people to do things that we want them to do. And we continue to say that we want to be good for the environment and blah, 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 and we continue to do nothing about it. I guess it's the progress without change motto for this village. Now, I need to go on because I have a number of things I wanted to address. So
Ted, you got 3 minutes.
I know. Well, you've let other people go like 4.5.
Ted,
5.
you got 3 minutes
I'm
tonight.
doing my best, but now I can't because. Second, the moratorium of the construction was not my idea. My name's come up in the paper a couple times on this. That actually came from the village. I just want to point that out there, that wasn't my idea. I didn't even know what a moratorium was until I read it in the agenda packet. It also occurs to me that the properties on the lake are zoned with a front yard at the beach. So front yards are different than backyards, right? We have mailmen come up to our front door all the time. We can't shoot them for walking on our private land because it's not really private, it's quasi-public. the village should really consider this, and the lakefront owners should consider it too, because by calling it a front yard, legally, we've like decreased their quote-unquote privacy to the land between the public street and their front door. Just a point, no one seems to want to change it, and I think that's because there is some benefit to keeping it that way. And now the main thing that I wanted to talk about is the street ends. So you all know now, because I know you got it, that the village has no authority, at least they declared that they had no authority to close the street ends back in 2000. The village, you know, has had discussions about how the street ends should be done. Spruce Street was a public beach, not a utility breach. The stairs were there for the public. Other things like the Oak Street end, nothing was done in 2000 because it was undeveloped, and now it's clearly been developed by the private landowners on either side. If everything in the village is equitable, if everyone is equal, then these encroachments into public land along the lakeshore need to be remedied. The village knows about it, it's documented, the village has done things to other people that have built stuff in the parkway. The village needs to address this. The village needs to go back and remove the restrictions for public access, which the village in its own writing has agreed that has no authority to impose. The village should reinstall stairs at the bottom of the Reens. They should reconsider what's going on at Willow. The point is that these actions all seem to be designed for one thing and one thing only, and that is to support the privatization of public land in deference to lakeshore owners at the expense of everyone else. So I would ask that you guys reconsider that and at least have staff do what council has directed them to do before, which is keeping access. Okay.
Thank you, Ted. Would anybody else like to address council on an item that is not on the agenda? I thought we had a... Okay. All right. Well, if no one else wants to speak this evening, I will close public comment and we'll move forward to reports. We'll start with trustee reports. We'll start with Tina. Any report?
Just that I attended the last Plan Commission meeting, and as I think you've seen from your package, there was full support for presenting it at the joint village council meeting on March 14th. I think it's hundreds of hours with lots of great work by the Plan Commission and staff, as well as our consultants. So unfortunately, I will not be able to be here with you, but I think you'll enjoy the joint session. And I think we don't know where the village is going. It's a planning document, as we all know, but I think it's a really good attempt to anticipate where the village will go and things to think about for the future. Nothing's cast in stone, right?
Thanks, Tina.
Yep.
Kim?
No report.
Andy?
I just want to thank the Winnetka Fire and Police Department. They were dispatched to my house last week after my wife lost a knife fight with an avocado. And they arrived within 3 minutes. They kept my youngest distracted and calm. They also kept my wife calm. And they even started cleaning up because it looked a bit like a murder scene. They threw away the blood-stained chicken, and they were remarkable, so thank you. I don't have all the names,
All in a day's work.
but really phenomenal. And I was downtown when I got the call, and my son told me, they're here already, and it was just very reassuring to know that we had such a good team.
We'll let them know.
So, thank you.
Brown?
I'm not sure how I top that. No report.
Village attorney?
No report tonight.
Village manager?
No report this evening.
And village president. I have a prepared statement this evening.
Did you have something?
Oh, I'm sorry, Bob.
No report, Chris, thank you.
It was so much easier to remember you when I saw you up on the screen here a little bit ago.
Out of sight, out of mind, I get it.
Okay. Now it's my turn. And actually, I'm addressing the issue that Ted brought forth initially here. On February 23rd, the village received a 120-page inquiry by a resident who has expressed concern over the village's action over the last 25 years in closing street-end access to Lake Michigan. The inquiry document has been shared with all members of council. While I haven't reviewed the entire document as of yet, I do plan on taking the time to read it and consider some of the issues raised. I want to manage expectations here, though, because we won't be seeing this on an agenda anytime soon. My best guess is if there is sufficient interest on the council and in the community, we might be able to take a deeper look at this in 2024. At present, we have no flexibility in our budget to address the issue, nor do we have the bandwidth at council at this time. We just spent the better part of 3 months dealing with Park District issues and the related study of lakefront regulations to the exclusion of items that were originally programmed for us to study. Understand, I'm not minimizing the issue, it just doesn't rise to the urgency we have seen on several recent items. Staff has been under a lot of pressure lately to prepare for all these special meetings we've been having and moving on, basically turning on a dime. And we need to continue to working on the items that are already in the pipeline and that they've been working on as well. So that's that thing. Ted, it'll be a while, but we'll start talking about it. Where'd you go? There you are, okay. Secondly, I attended the pre-construction meeting for the Cook County site. Berger looks like they're raring and ready to go, and we should see some activity over there pretty soon. And lastly, yesterday I just met with staff out on Moffett Mall to talk a little bit about the proposed signage for the new mall and trying to pare down some of this signage that has just grown and grown and grown over the years and synthesize it down to the things that are the messages we really need to send. And don't worry, Rob, we're looking at the bike signs too. So. And that's my report. So we'll move forward at this point for the consent agenda. Does any trustee wish to remove any item on the consent agenda for a separate vote? Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve the final form of the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, that carries. Item 7 is the consent agenda, and I will ask the village clerk to read the items on the consent agenda.
Thank you. Approval of village council minutes for February 21st, 2023, regular meeting. Approval of the warrant list dated February 10th, 2023. February 10th, 2023, in the amount of $782,138.87. Ordinance number MC 03-2023, amending Chapter 1308 of the Winnetka Village Code concerning interconnection of renewable energy sources. Ordinance number M4-2023, 232 Sheridan, GFA, corner and rear yard setback variations. Resolution number R30-2023, amending resolution number R17-2022 to amend the method of calculating renewable energy production credits. Resolution number R31-2023, approving an intergovernmental agreement with the Winnetka Foreign Fire Insurance Board for the provision of administrative services. Resolution number R32-2023, awarding a contract to A-Lamp Concrete Incorporated for the construction of streetscape and site improvements for 93 Green Bay Road, and approval of additional outdoor seating area permits.
Great. Okay, may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda by omnibus vote?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote?
Trustee Dahlman?
Yes.
Trustee Kreip?
Yes.
Trustee Handler?
Yes.
Trustee Dearborn?
Yes.
Trustee Apatow?
Yes.
That motion carries, thank you. All right, moving forward, we have ordinances and resolutions. Item 8A is ordinance number MCO 4-2023, amending the Winnetka Village Code regarding the Class X special use liquor permit classification. Village staff is requesting that this item be deferred for consideration at a later date without objection. Is there any objection? Okay, therefore this item is deferred. Okay, 8B, resolution number R33-2023, waiving bidding and approving change order number 1 to the contract with Brock Industrial Services LLC for asbestos abatement in boiler number 8, and this is up for adoption. in order to complete repairs to boiler number 8, additional removal of boiler casing and insulation is required. Excuse me. Water and Electric Director Brian Keys is here this evening to review this.
Thanks for the introduction, President Lance. As you may recall, in January, I approached the board about approval to perform repairs on boiler number 8, one of 4 boilers at the power plant, and our largest, and I should say newest, being 1964. The council awarded a contract to Independent Mechanical, and the contractor completed the scope of work in February. As part of the final acceptance of putting the boiler back into service, we do a pressure test, and unfortunately identified additional leaks in the top section of the boiler. So this was outside of the scope of work that either part of Brock Industrial or that Independent Mechanical had been contracted to deal with. Because it's in a different section of the boiler, we have to remove the exterior casing of the boiler and insulation, and that contains asbestos. So we had a proposal from Brock, who had done previous work for us on this repair under the procurement authority of the village manager that was under $25,000. Brock submitted a proposal for $73,706, and upon receipt of that proposal, we also requested a proposal from another company that could do the abatement work, which was M&O. And their proposal cost was in excess of $53,000. So what's before you tonight is because we have to enter another part of the boiler from the outside to get to the area that needs to be repaired, we're asking for a change order. The original contract was executed under the village manager's authority, but this would put it clearly over $25,000. That's why it's change order number 1. As previously explained to the council, the repair of this boiler was not a budgeted item. There is a operating and maintenance account for the boilers and turbines in the amount of $338,250. I've identified 2 offsets of projects that we were planning to do in the fall that will defer until either we get into the fall and see where the budget lands or tackle in the spring of '24. But even with that offset, I'm looking at, we're currently at a year-to-date spend of about $290,000 on that account. And I'm projecting that if all the consumable items would come to fruition, not including any unexpected repairs, that account, not the whole budget, but that specific line item account, would potentially be trending about $82,000 over budget for the year. So we plan on providing you periodic updates to where that account's running. But I would ask your consideration of approving a change order to Brock Industrial so we could proceed with moving forward with the repairs.
Questions for Brian?
Just a quick one. If I understand it's one of those things we just don't know until you do it. Would you have done anything differently? Would we have taken the same progression, or would we have just tried
No,
to
so
bite the bullet?
they didn't know the second leak, but none of the work we did caused the second leak, and based on the amount of the initial tubes that were damaged, they had so much water coming out of those initial tube leaks that they didn't identify the other ones. So we're, I'll say, hopeful or optimistic. That's a smaller amount of repair work, but the unfortunate part is an entirely different section of the boiler, and that's, I mean, if it had all been right there, some of this cost would have been avoided, but now we're going into another section of the boiler.
Okay, thanks.
And number 8 boiler, as a side note, has been, in compared to some of the other units, a very reliable unit for us.
So what's the life expectancy, you think, after this, if these repairs are done?
Yeah, I think that'd probably be an appropriate answer.
Do you have any chewing gum to put in there? Thanks.
Other questions? Okay, Peter, you want to explain?
Yeah, this is, because this is a waiver of competitive bid, it requires a supermajority vote of 2/3 of the elected trustees, so that's 4 trustees. The village president doesn't vote on supermajority vote like this.
Thank you.
Okay. All got that? All right. No other questions? Public comment. Would anybody from the public like to comment on this issue? Seeing none, I'll close that and bring it back up. Any comments, discussions, issues? Okay. We'll move ahead. May I have a motion to adopt resolution number R33, 2023?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote.
Trustee Dahlman?
Yes.
Trustee Kripe?
Yes.
Trustee Handler?
Yes.
Trustee Dearborn?
Yes.
Trustee Apatow?
Yes.
That motion carries. Thank you. Okay, item C is resolution number R 2023, approving change order number 1 for a contract with Independent Mechanical Industries for tube installation and boiler casing replacement in boiler number 8. While performing a pressure test of boiler number 8 after completing repairs, another leak was identified in the top section of the boiler. And Brian didn't even bother sitting down, so go for it.
So same repair that I just spoke about, second contractor that's required. So as previously approved, we'll have Brock remove the exterior casing, the abatement work for the insulation. Then we're recommending Independent Mechanical continue on with the additional tube repair. Because they cannot physically see it, they cannot give us a proposal to fix it. I'm asking your consideration of funding authorization in the amount of $50,000 so that when it's opened up, if it's $50,000 or less, that we can proceed with the repair rather than getting back on your agenda at a later date and time. I'm pressing to get the boiler returned to service by May 1st. We have some permitting time that we have to do with the asbestos work, the physical time to perform it, before the Independent Mechanical even be able to put their eyes on it. And when you start to lay that out as far as a duration and then making a repeat appearance to you for your consideration, is if it's $50,000 or less, I'd like approval to proceed. If it's more than 50, we'll book another return trip for additional discussion. Same repairs, same budget account as I previously discussed.
Questions for Brian? Hearing none. Any public comment on this item? None there. They'll bring it back. No conversation, I guess.
No.
Okay, we'll move it forward then. May I have a motion to adopt resolution number R 2023?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote?
Trustee Abutoff?
Yes.
Trustee Dahlman?
Yes.
Trustee Dearborn?
Yes.
Trustee Handler?
Yes.
Trustee Kreip?
Yes.
That motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Brian. Okay, item D tonight is ordinance number MCO 2023, amending chapter 9.12 of the Winnetka Village Code concerning firearm regulations, and this is up for introduction. At the December 13th study session, council directed the village attorney to prepare an ordinance amending existing firearm regulations in the village code. Interim Police Chief Brian O'Connell and Village Attorney Peter Friedman will provide us with information on this. Who's going first?
I will go. Thank you, Mr. President. So, as the President said, we were directed to, first, as you all know, you went through a pretty extensive public discussion about this and a review of the regulations that you asked us to undertake. And the amendments that are in the proposed ordinance are not fundamentally changing the village's regulations and the scope of the regulations on firearms. That was deliberately pursuant to your direction, but they are, in 3 or 4 instances, cleaning up some language and making sure that it's on all fours with current law. So I can go through them very briefly. They're relatively straightforward. As you know, we have safe storage and transportation regulations for all assault weapons. And they're divided up in 2 places. One is subsection A of this section is a safe storage provision, and B is a transportation. But we noticed that in the A provision, there was some transportation language that really didn't belong there. So we deleted that and made it clear that which regulations applied to which activity. The second thing we did was for the transportation of assault weapons, there are 3 basic criteria, but they were written in the disjunctive rather than the conjunctive. So we got rid of the ors and we added the ands. That's consistent with many neighboring communities. Finally, there was one of the exceptions regarding transportation of assault weapons are law enforcement officials, local, state, and federal. But there was this odd provision that seemed to restrict it to only on public ways. That didn't make a lot of sense, so we recommended that that be deleted. We have an extensive program and provision on the surrender of handguns and ammunition. There was some ambiguous language in there, so we, I think, clarified it, but we left in and made more explicit that the the surrender of any handgun or ammunition doesn't moot or affect any ongoing investigation regarding that weapon. And finally, the penalties. You all said that we should, do whatever we can with regard to penalties. So the penalties for the discharge of firearms goes up from 150 to 300, or not more than 2,000. So basically double the current fines. And the same goes true of the other provisions of the firearms regulations. They also double from a minimum of 1,000 to a maximum of 2,000, all of which are authorized under home rule for you to increase those fines. And that's the sum and substance of it.
Okay, Brian, you have anything to add? No. Okay. Any questions for Peter on this? Comments, changes?
Peter, can I ask, or Chris, can I ask Peter a question?
Sure.
So Peter, in the ordinance, you talk about assault weapons. In your memo, you give a definition of assault weapons, but the definition is not part of the ordinance. In other words, we just say assault weapons in the ordinance. I mean, should there be some reference to what we're referring to as assault weapons?
The definition that you see in the code of assault weapons is not being changed. It continues to exist. The reason it's not in this ordinance is that we're not amending it.
So in the code, there is a definition?
Absolutely, very extensive definition.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Good. Okay. And the only other thing, if this is passed, which I hope it is, but if it's passed, I would hope, and maybe Rob, you coordinate this, I think we should send out something that is special to this this initiative of the village, including perhaps even have a link to Peter's memo, which we obviously have on the website. But I think it's, we're largely in the hands of federal and state wrangling over this issue, but we're doing what we can. And I thought the memo was fantastic, and I think we should have residents see what we've done here, more than just buried in a line item in the weekly mailing. That's just my thought.
Any other questions for Peter? Okay. Would anybody in the audience like to speak to this item this evening? Seeing none, I'll bring it back up here. Any last comments or questions? No? I think the bottom line here, I talked to a few of the folks over at Moms Demand Action last week, is that, I think we had all the best intentions when we set out on this examination last fall. And, with the state stepping up and preempting just about anything that we were considering doing, we're in a situation now where it's wait and see, because we don't even know where that's going until it gets through the Supreme Court. So the safe storage is going to be something that I think we continue to emphasize and hopefully communicate throughout the year. And Chief, I know you probably continued on with the stuff that Mark started relative to, I can't remember the name of the operation that has the gun locks. SafeSmart, right? Yeah, I got an email from him this week, as a matter of fact. So, we still are continuing with all these the safe storage issues, and certainly once the state issues resolve, we'll probably be coming back and having a little more conversation on this at that point in time. But this is what we could do at this point in time. So, all right. Moving it forward, may I have a motion to introduce ordinance number MC02-2023?
So moved.
Second.
Voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
That motion carries. Thank you. All right, item E, ordinance number MC05-2023, Village Code Update, Lakefront Regulations. This is up for adoption, for introduction. While directing village attorney and staff to study comprehensive amendments to amend the village code regarding lakefront regulations, it was determined that a limited set of stopgap permitting and having a rough night tonight, folks. we needed some stopgap measures, okay? And just so people understand, you know, we did receive some, you know, several emails on this, as late as 6:22 this evening, actually. And hopefully, those that are interested in this understand that this is just a first step. That the first step here is to claim that half mile out in the lake is part of our jurisdiction and move it forward that way. We are going to be coming back multiple times to discuss the various aspects of what it is we're actually going to regulate on the lakefront and what things make sense and what things do not make sense. And hopefully we'll be in a position where we're guided by people who are experts and practitioners in this discipline, and will help us make sure that whatever we do is something that's important, pertinent, and applicable, and most importantly, doesn't harm the property values of the people that live down there. So just understand, this is just a stopgap measure at this point. We've heard people's comments and additions, but we really need to take a very, very calculated and careful approach to this whole thing. And it's going to move slowly because we want to do it right. And to be honest with you, there isn't one person sitting up here who has the expertise and the practical expertise to start throwing stuff against the wall here to see if it's going to stick or not. And we know there's a lot of people with a lot of great ideas who have been involved in this conversation. And when we have those conversations, you guys are welcome to come and join us and participate in the conversations. It's not what this is about tonight, though. Tonight is just about cleaning up what we have and grabbing that half mile and saying, now that's part of ours as well as some other zoning issues that Peter will follow up on right now.
Thank you. So the ordinance, as the village president said, was deliberately narrow, and, you know, as short and sweet as we could. It took what the kind of the provisions that Trustee Kripe had identified in the presentation and put, you know, for one of a, you know, meat on the bone, so that if we do get a future application for a structure along the lake, we have a system until we complete the more comprehensive review. So what the ordinance does, it first, as the village president said, it confirms what our charter says, but now we put in the code that the village's corporate limits extend half mile into the lake, and its jurisdiction under state statute extends 3 miles beyond our corporate limits. So it states that in the code now. The language, I know it's a little awkward, the language, we took it exactly from the charter. We did not want to change the language in the charter, so that's the way the charter was written, that's why we use that language. In essence, it's a permitting, these are permitting changes to require a permit for any construction in the lake or in private or public land adjacent to the lake that requires a permit from one of 4 federal or state agencies, the MWRD, the IDNR, IEPA, or the Army Corps. If any construction in that area requires a permit, then under this, it would require a village permit as well. The application requirements for the village permit are the application submittals for those other permits. So we're not adding anything, we're not adding paperwork. It's what they've already submitted to those agencies. The applicants are required to, the village engineer is the village official in charge of the program. The applicants are required to meet with the village engineer before they submit these other applications, so that we have a heads up, and so the village engineer can, you know, be involved in the process and express whatever issues or concerns the village engineer may have at that point. And then there's an ongoing process under the ordinance where if there's a negative denial of one of the permits, the applicant has to inform the village. The applicant has to provide, before they get a permit from the village, all of the other permits. So our permit is the last permit under this. And if the, as soon as all those permits are obtained, then the village attorney has to act relatively quickly. We did not want to hold up, unless there's a reason to, a project that has already received all of its other applicable permits. So the village engineer has 14 days to make a decision. That's not going to be 14 days from a dead stop. The village engineer is going to have known about this project for months before that 14 days. If the village engineer, if the village engineer issues a decision that the applicant disagrees with, the applicant can appeal directly to the village board, and the village board has to decide that within 60 days after it gets it. So again, we tried to, and the appeal process at the village board requires notice to all property owners within 500 feet, posting on the website, and a sign on the property. And then the appeal to the village board includes deliberation at a public meeting where interested parties will be able to address their comments and concerns on the appeal. The actual decision is based on, the village engineer can only issue a permit if the application meets 7 criteria. And the 7 criteria are, these won't be the 7 criteria that you will have at the end of the comprehensive review. These are 7 criteria that are legally proper, that give the village engineer the necessary discretion to review these permit applications, not overly broad, but with some parameters. So the 7, very simply, the applicant has to have received all of the permits. There's the height of whatever structure is being constructed it has to be what's minimally necessary for the purpose of the project. And you're going to hear that minimally necessary again after a comprehensive review. Maybe there can be more of an objective criteria on height. I don't know what that is. We certainly, I don't think, know what that number should be right now. So this seemed like a good standard. Somebody is going to have to say that that height is minimally necessary and no more to get a permit. The application has to comply with all applicable village codes. And then here's that same standard again, the project scope, how big of the construction is, et cetera, can be no more than minimally necessary for the project. The project cannot create a public safety hazard, cannot interfere with public safety operations and personnel, and then cannot impact sight lines any greater than minimally necessary, again, for the purpose of the project. Again, realize that those are in some ways broad, but at least narrowed to 7, but they are legally proper. If somebody, they're legally proper, if the village engineer, somebody can always challenge the village engineer, the applicant, and somebody can always challenge the village board's decision. That's where that will be, but not on its face, these standards. The standards are perfectly legal. There's also provisions for inspection of the project, both during and after construction, to make sure it's being maintained properly. And there's provisions for the retention, if necessary, of a coastal engineer, and the applicants are responsible for reimbursing the village for those costs. And with that, that's the summary.
Thank you. Does anybody have questions for Peter?
Peter, was this great drafting? I thought it was, succinct and focused. Was it based on any other, or is it similar to other jurisdictions, or is this a whole cloth?
Whole cloth.
Whole cloth,
Yep.
tailored uniquely to
Yep.
meet our needs? So it's not as extensive as Evanston or, I think, Highland Park?
Right.
Right.
Yet.
I mean, the concept of the permits from the other agencies driving the process, I think that's similar to Highland Park's process. So that concept is not new, but the way it's worded in the process, the specific process is unique.
And And I think in the 7 criteria, you were thinking about the criteria that once was part of the individual permit process, and that now that the federal process has been streamlined, this reinserts was that intentionally? So we're not really changing any criteria, it's just because the federal system,
Yeah.
federal permitting system became more streamlined,
Right.
necessarily more streamlined, that it's just giving us, plugging the hole to make sure that some of these things were being looked at.
Yeah, and
Okay.
and the other thing, in the discussions we had down there, these 7 criteria came up. I mean,
Yep.
So, it was from our notes as to the things you all were talking about.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Others? Okay.
Hey, Peter, Chris, quick question for Peter.
Sure.
And it's probably in one of the 7 criteria, Peter, but where is the provision for, I'll call it pedestrian access, vis-a-vis the public trust doctrine? I don't know if it's under the E, no public safety hazard. I mean, just the ability, as we talked about, or I'll call it pedestrians, I don't know if that's what it is, a waterfront walker, to be able to walk the water and have, reasonably easy access, to those waterways. Is that in here?
Yeah, no, we did not address that, one, because the public trust doctrine is, of course, the state's doctrine, so they have to comply with that. Nothing we say in here, whatever the public trust doctrine requires, it requires, and this doesn't change that. It can't change that.
You do have the language in E, that no public
Right.
safety hazard, the cover construction and any related structures will not create any public safety hazards, including without limitation to, by unreasonably obstructing or otherwise interfering with ingress or egress to adjacent public beaches or private property. So that at least provides some starting point for protecting people moving down the lakefront and making sure they can do so safely. It's not the full sort of argument that I think people would like to see us take on, and which you may at some point, but it's that.
It seems to me that language gives Jim the ability to put it on his checklist and make sure that if there is no stairs or whatever the way you're
Yeah.
gonna get through or around something is, that it's in your review process and it's something we can cite, right?
It's actually required as part of the IDNR permit. There's that language in there that says about being able to traverse an obstacle in there. So IDNR is taking a stronger look at that based
Good.
on the last group discussion we had. It's something that I would be looking at to make sure that egress is permissible and it's maintained.
Yeah, I will say that they kind of dropped the ball on a few of the recent installations down there, so that's why we're doing what we're doing,
Yeah.
right? Is because we can't allow others, feel like others are watching out for our best interests, so.
So am I hearing that it would be, and I can barely hear what Andy said, but it would be part of E, I get, that, it's been a topic of conversation, obviously.
It's in there, Bob.
It's in what? It's in E?
Yeah,
E.
yeah, the second clause in E.
Well, it gives you, I think it's a little bit more nuanced, right? It's giving it's a subjective determination that the village engineer will have.
Well,
To look at.
Right, it's saying, the village engineer can deny it if he thinks there's a public safety hazard. One of the examples of a public safety hazard is if it unreasonably obstructs or otherwise interferes with ingress and egress to the adjacent public beaches or private property.
Yeah, and I think about this, Bob, hopefully you can hear me now that we've got our microphones on, is, if, God forbid, there's an accident or, a fire or something, and for whatever reason, they can't get access through the property, they need to come to the adjacent property, that would be the basis of, preventing perhaps a wall or something that, because maybe sometimes we can get better access to other properties to come down around or something. So I think that would be a criteria.
Well, I agree with that, I guess, and maybe this is jumping ahead to the next iteration here, but I understand the safety. Andy went through that really quite well in his presentation a few weeks ago. But this is a little different topic, I think. But, you know, hopefully that would be part of the permitting requirement right now.
Correct.
It's sort of related to that, if I can ask a question now. We were just back in that section where we are talking about public safety and hazards, and one of the main things that came out of our last meeting was the phrase health, safety, and welfare of the community. But up in the purpose section, it doesn't mention that as one of the purposes for this document. It just refers, or I should say just primarily refers to the environmental and ecological damage to the village and lake. I wondered if we should have close that loop and have that the purpose also is to protect the health, safety, and welfare. And I know that there'll be other things later on that also impact health, safety, and welfare, but we are beginning to refer to them here already. Any thoughts?
That's up to the council.
How would you do that, Kim?
Well, I'm not an attorney to write this, but, well, the regulation, let's see, let me go back to the entire thing. Well, somewhere up in the section that's the purpose,
So I would just,
along with protecting the health, safety, and welfare of
the one thing I would point out, so that health, safety, language that I was referring to
Yep.
came from the Public Nuisance Code, which is 9.16.020. And one of the helpful things Peter did is he connected this new construction language to that. So, right, Peter, you've got
Yep.
now under the definition of public nuisances, that's where we have, Kim, to your point, we have the general language about peace and safety, and that's the health, safety, all that stuff. But he specifically now lists any construction activity and related structures that do not comply with the provisions of chapter 15.78 of his code. So you kind of have to map it back and forth, but I think that general purpose.
And that was sort of my point,
yeah.
is that you have to map it all back and forth instead of it being right up there in the purpose, but,
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
it's,
that's-
when you see it in the code itself, it's like there's separate, they're in very separate sections, right? So 15 is the building code. 9 is the general section titled Public Peace, Morals, and Welfare. So we have these different kind of major buckets, but now they're cross-referencing each other. Maybe if what you're saying is you don't see that public nuisance standard referenced in the building code,
No, in the purpose.
in the
in the
purpose.
purpose.
The
So
purpose
this
of
is,
this-
to me,
of
the
this.
purpose of this
So
document.
maybe,
I mean, we can.
You know, I'm looking at it
that-
sort of, I'll
yeah.
say as a
paragraph.
layperson who wants to pick it up and make sure I understand what the,
that's where you trick from the charter, right? No, that's,
This was,
yeah, that's.
this was written. But legally, it's, I mean, there's no, I mean, everything, every ordinance that you adopt is for public health and safety and welfare.
That's
I
the
mean,
basis
your
of
home rule
zoning.
ordinance,
It's the
so-
basics.
Got it right here.
Zoning law, yeah.
I see what you're saying, and I think there's a way to do it that might be a.
You want me to just to bring it back for,
It probably makes it,
So that last sentence is, the regulations in this chapter are further intended to provide that construction in and adjacent to Lake Michigan and its shoreline will not cause environmental or ecological damage to the lake or surrounding areas of the village or
adversely,
otherwise.
yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Adversely impact the, what was it, health, safety, and welfare of the village.
See, you did such a good job.
As residents,
Of the village or its residents.
yeah.
Okay. So the insertion at the end here, and I
I
can
got
just
it.
do
I got
Okay.
it.
Or
Yep.
otherwise adversely impact the health, safety, and welfare of the village or its residents. Yeah, good.
I got it. We'll include that, assuming we introduce tonight for
Sure.
adoption.
Is that okay, Kim?
Yeah. Are we launching into, I'll save other things for discussion, I think.
Hmm?
Should we say, are we gonna have different
No,
discussion?
this
or
is
should-
it now.
Okay. I have a couple other things I'm gonna share. Actually, back in that section, there's a little wording thing. The phrase that they may accelerate the erosion process, I thought perhaps the word impact, just because I'm thinking of all we've sat through, that there are other ways that projects can impact the erosion process, that impact, or some other word, was a little broader than only talking about acceleration of erosion. That was one other idea I had. The biggest one I felt overall, which is funny that I don't think it was, is I thought that since this is temporary, and as we've all acknowledged, we're all learning and gathering new information and want to refine this process, that I thought that temporarily we should treat this and not have the final okay for a permit reside in the engineering department, but like we see for other variances or permits, the staff would, obviously, as they do all the work, and then present it to the village council for final review. I
got
was
a problem
trying
with
to-
that.
Pardon? Well, again, this was temporary. I'm almost thinking that ultimately we might end up at a spot where it's similar to that there are administrative approvals at a projects at a certain level, and just like we do now, whether it's been playground, surface or special use permits, certain things end up coming to us. Relatedly, this whole topic obviously has gotten a lot of public attention as we're all learning and digging into our code. I think to have this be in the public and have public discussion about our logic and understanding of why things are or not the best approach for a project would be a positive thing.
How many projects are we looking at a year for this type of, that would rise to this?
It's the process that's the problem.
Understand,
Yeah,
I'm
but-
just curious in general,
Yeah, less than a handful.
less than a handful.
But,
Yeah.
but I
So-
guess I'm a little bit concerned because these are residential uses presumably permitted by the zoning code. It's not a special use permit, right? It's not in the zoning code that this is not a permitted use outright. You're then getting into people's property rights, right? I don't want necessarily the village officials to, get involved with that when it's really an administrative decision of, that issue. I'm concerned about having this come to the council because we're dealing with a zone that, largely for residences is going to be within a permitted residential zone. There's no unless there's a variance.
But we're acknowledging that we're gonna be revising and updating the process. I think we'll be better informed and be in better position as we go through this process to set new policy if we've,
I think the issue is, issuance of a building permit is a technical question. Issues of policy, like zoning variances, special use permits, are policy issues. Some would take issue with how good we are with policy issues, but that is appropriately our zone of influence. I'm absolutely confident we are not good with building issues, except maybe Chris. He's got the technical expertise, but it's not a policy question, and it's not in our area of competence.
Well, and the other problem I have is that if an individual takes personal exception to something that's proposed, it now gets aired out in the court of public opinion here in this room. And I don't think it's fair to expect our residents in this community to have to come out here and show up in front of their neighbors and justify something they want to do to their personal residence. It would be like, Kim, if for some reason your garage wasn't per code, or there was something that you needed a variance on to build your addition, and the only way you could get it done would be to come here and play it out in public, on the microphones, on the camera.
I would do that to the zoning board.
But-
And I mean, I have to say, we're not experts
they're not on
in
the-
boilers, and yet we
No,
voted,
we're experts on zoning, and those are inherently policy questions.
Those are rezones.
Yeah,
I mean, this is a permitted residential use and what people are gonna do with their properties. And, you know, if it's like a fence, right? We permit certain fences and those are permitted outright. And if something goes beyond the size of a fence or it's in a location we don't approve, then it has to go through a policy process. But this is just on the technical requirements of something that,
I think the one difference is though, there's if you want a fence over 6 feet, it's very clear. We have very interpretive language in here about the minimals, and it's pretty subjective on a pretty hot topic. So I understand both sides of it, I get it, I'm just trying to.
That's
But I don't think we can let the heat of the topic dictate a
Understand.
bad decision on an
I'm
ordinance.
just thinking it's a little bit of uncharted waters until
Right.
we bring it down to a more defined.
Defined.
You
Right,
need
but we
to
have a
that
path.
policy discussion and set the rules and set them clearly so that people know what the rules are. You can't set down vague rules and then say, come to us and we'll think about it. So this sets down, this is like that old proverb, to find the path, we must first take the first step, right? This is the first step. You don't know the whole path yet. You don't know exactly where you're gonna, you know, but you can't cheat the process.
But then,
You're
I
gonna
guess
have
we're
to do
saying
the
then the
homework.
engineering department doesn't have the process yet either.
But they have access to the technical knowledge, either in-house or the ability to send stuff out now to Baird and say, give us a read on this. Please run the numbers and verify that this is the minimal height, the minimum width, the minimum out to the lake. All those things get determined technically,
I understand that,
And
not,
but we haven't defined
here.
those yet. Just as tonight, when Brian gave a presentation on
And-
boilers and asbestos, we count on staff, that's the expertise.
and I will tell everybody at this table that I can just about guarantee you that we are not going to have an elevation that's a maximum elevation. We're not gonna have a width that's a maximum width. We aren't gonna have any of that because in the past few weeks, I've asked Rob and Jim to reach out and ask our coastal engineer if we could have numbers like that. And the bottom line is because of the.
Everyone is unique.
Right, turns out the lake is a living organism, and the conditions that might be occurring at Tower Road might not be the same conditions that are occurring at Willow or at Winnetka Avenue, because the sand movements and the depth of the water and all this stuff comes into play. So it's completely conditional, and I think one of the frustrating exercises we're gonna have is trying to figure out what things we can actually lay down numerically that are fair and technically correct. So,
I'm trying to get Jim some boundaries, so to make
Yeah.
your life a little easier, because otherwise
Well-
it's really almost unfair.
the easiest way for him to do it is to package it up and send it over to Baird and say, tell me what you think.
And that, as we've looked at this,
And the applicant pays for it anyway.
in this interim period, that we've talked administratively, how would we handle this? And we would hire the coastal engineer right away for their technical review and determination as to what would be minimally necessary. And that would change depending upon the depth of the lake
That
bed and
is a
things like that.
standard the Army Corps has used. I mean, this isn't something that was pulled out of thin air. This is a standard that they were
To help our in-house
Oh,
staff.
yeah,
that
I
are-
agree, but it became clear that the Army Corps and the IDNR had a very different standard of what they're looking at than what we may be looking at. So that, even though they get permitted, that's great, well, they weren't even looking at the same, it's apples and oranges.
Right.
And that's why
Looking at
I was
different
concerned
things.
about how do we give Brian and because they said, wait, I have all my permits, and we'll say, yeah, but there's nothing to do with what we would really approve or not approve.
If I could.
Sure.
Maybe just to add some context to, each agency looks at a different aspect of the permit application. They're not all looking at it holistically the same, but when you put the pieces together, it's a holistic review. So another aspect to keep in mind is all the communities that have these shoreline or lakefront regulations that control, none of them are required to go to a council to approve. It's all managed administratively with the expertise that they have on staff. If it decides that it's a specialty type of project that requires the assistance of recommendation, that's when it escalates. To the best of my knowledge, to date, that hasn't happened yet at any of the councils up and down the shoreline. But they have the regulations and they're managed within house, and then they seek the expertise as they need it depending on the complexity of it. Is it a large beach, you know, a park improvement? Is it a small residential? They seek those expertise based on that need. And so their lakefront helps guide staff and the village engineers on how to do that. Just extra.
Thanks, Jim.
This is mine. No, it's yours.
Well, I had one other.
Go
one
ahead.
other thought. And these are somewhat arbitrary in that regard, but the fact we notify people 500 feet on either side of a project, I think we've sort of learned, and as we've heard from so many lakefront property owners, that their situation is a little different than one who owns a home on a block inland. And the repercussions of what does happen with what's done on one lakefront property go much farther up and down the lake than what one would do on a house in my neighborhood. So I was throwing out that perhaps they should just, people 1,000 feet on either side should be notified. Now that I listened to you, Peter, I saw that they're gonna have a sign on the property and there'll be a notice on the website. But is this notification just sending out a few more form letters? I would just err toward the side of notifying more lakefront property owners than fewer.
What's 1,000 feet, 3 homes? Howard?
Because we expanded it based upon zoning notification to.
I just feel like we've gotten the feedback from lakefront owners that if, you know,
Generally, 500 feet would include 4 to 7 property owners on either side. There are some instances where it's fewer because the lots are so wide, or there's a public park or whatever, village rights of way. But yeah, so 1,000 feet could be anywhere from 6 to 14 property owners on both sides, on each side, I should say.
Thank you.
Is that our standard, David, for any notice is 500 feet?
In terms of, from a zoning perspective, our standard notice is 250 feet,
Okay,
except the commercial overlay district, we made that 500 feet.
okay.
So where we at here, Kim? We're at 500 now?
yeah. Again, if all that involves is a few more form letters, again, from some of the discussion we've heard from lakefront owners, I think letting more know
Be impacted.
than
Be
fewer
good.
would be a nice thing to do.
You okay with that? Andy?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I don't have an objection
1,000?
if it's not difficult to administer. And that will pull in people from across the street and.
Yeah.
More, Kim?
That's it for now.
Okay, any other comments or questions?
Good work.
Chris, can I wait for a second here?
Go ahead, Bob.
And again, I thought, Peter, that this was, really well written. There were a lot of aspects of the ordinance that I thought or the code changes that I thought really hit the nail on the head. So thank you for that. I want to go back a little bit. Part of it, as I was reading it, we can all wordsmith and all this type of thing, but a lot of it depends on how long this stopgap is in place. If we think we're going to have something where we're putting meat on the bones and get some standards that are a little more detailed, a little more expansive than just, minimally necessary for the intended, project. If that's a 2-month type thing, then great. But if it's a 6-9 month type thing, I'm not certain, I guess, given the resident interest in this topic, how we as the council and how the public will be made aware of lakefront projects, whether small and insignificant or large and expansive, are notified, made aware of it, the transparency aspect to it.
Hey, Bob,
So that's where, I'm sorry?
why, And I'm just curious, and I'm gonna probe here because there's a lot of different perspectives on this issue.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to understand why you are treating lakefront property owners any different than any other property owners in the community when they have construction, three or four houses being torn down on a single block, construction all over, you know, behind the alley and all that stuff. I mean, how do you draw a distinction between the lakefront and all the other residents who don't get noticed when a new construction project happens in their neighborhood?
Yeah, I think, Chris, I do, because I go back to, and I guess I'll just quote the purpose, is creating permitting requirements for construction adjacent and within Lake Michigan. Its coastline provide a unique natural resource to the village and to its residents must be preserved and protected. I view the lakefront as being a uniquely special asset. I'm not really, you know, it's not, I don't think it's necessarily completely analogous to my neighbor on Arborvitae or whatever. I think there's a public use to it. There are a lot of aspects to it, and we can't deny the fact that there is a very heightened interest in this right now. And all I'm saying is that in this little interim period, if it's a little interim period, I think there should be, and I don't know if it's Kim Handler's view of having it rise to the, you know, village council approving these things, or at least being notified. You know, I guess, you know, I'd like to know what's being approved, and I think where we're going to end up here probably is similar to zoning, where certain things are 90% are just approved at the staff level, and then certain, you know, we call them special uses or whatever, might bring it up to the village council for approval ultimately. But we have an interim period here, and I kind of feel like we, not knowing what that interim period is, I'm not necessarily saying we should approve, but I think there should be some notification, understanding to the council and the community what is being approved. And I'm not asking for lakefront owners to come and grovel in front of us, because again, 99% of the stuff down there is totally fine, and it's not even an issue. But, you know, we've had this put in front of us, and, you know, I just, almost for Jim Bernal and his staff's protection, I think there should be some notification process going on here. But I do view the lakefront differently. I will, you know, I admit to that.
Okay. Others?
Well, I would agree with that. That's why we're doing this whole process, because we are looking at the lakefront differently than every other house in them. And, you know, we're even saying that while we undertake a more comprehensive study and analysis of additional lakefront and steep slope regulations that we may want to adopt. I mean, so we've acknowledged that it is different, and we're gonna have to, or we are interested in looking at it, customizing what some of the regulations are.
I think it's a dangerous territory to get into. I think we need to be very narrow. I think, you know, maybe it's infused by, I'd be concerned about doing something different that the other municipalities haven't done, right? I think we expose us to potential litigation if we take it out of the technical realm. And I don't know if everything that people do on their property is really necessary for everybody in the village to know about. If it's determined to be minimally, you know, it's minimal and it meets certain technical requirements, I'm getting a little bit nervous about that. I understand that this is a hot topic for many residents, but I think it's also an important topic for a lot of property owners too.
Well, Tina, I make the point that the waterfront is not the property of the lakefront property owners. The water, what goes on there is public property. It's not the property of the owners there. And I think we heard loud and clear from the Army Corps and from IDNR that they do not regulate items outside of the water, above the water. And so we talked about the gap. And so I think, you know, we're still trying to fill this gap. And my only point is, and again, I'm not trying to wordsmith this in any way, shape, or form. I mean, I think Kim has some good points, but I just, you know, you say that we're getting into dangerous territory. Well, you know, we as a village, whether it's Jim Bernal, engineer, or someone else, is going to say yay or nay to a property owner. And, you know, whether it's rises to the village council in certain cases or not, you know, I think ultimately we might see that, but
You know,
again,
we might be
from a
debating an issue we
transparency
don't need.
standpoint and notification standpoint,
Bob, go ahead, I'm
Okay.
sorry. Andy felt like something, he wanted to throw something in
So this
here.
is already a matter of public record. These things are filed with the Army Corps. If you go to the Army Corps website, there's a searchable database. You can actually find, if you're curious. So our thing is saying, hey, we're gonna notify people this distance from the property. So we're affirmatively taking an additional step. But if people are really curious and they're about what's going on the lakefront, that's already done. Remember, our permit's just layering on top, so I'm not sure what we're even discussing right now.
Well,
but
Bob, the other thing too is I cannot guarantee you that we're gonna lay down some artificial time frame on our work on these really important issues, and it's a big, big body of knowledge that we have to absorb before we can have some intelligent conversations. And it's gonna, you know, look, we'll be talking about this all year, and I will be surprised if we finish the job in 2023, to be honest with you. Once we get into bluff regulations, I can see that just consuming oodles of time, because we're all completely ignorant on that as of right now, except for maybe those that have done their own private investigation on it. But, you know, Bob, I guess I'm taking my comfort in, we have a professional engineer on staff who's going to review these documents. He's going to pack them up and ship them off to a coastal engineer who is, you know, you've checked their credentials as well as anybody else, and know that they're, you know, a really top-notch outfit who have a lot of practical knowledge in this subject. And if both of them come back and say, yes, this is the minimum necessary to do the job, what the hell are we gonna do at council that's any different? We're gonna start I don't understand. We're gonna start questioning the professional judgment of our own engineer and an outside engineer so that we get to overrule them on this stuff? I just don't understand where it's going, Bob, with bringing it into council chambers.
well, again, Chris, I think that even Peter acknowledged the vagueness of some of the language of the permitting with the minimally necessary to achieve the intended purpose of the project. I mean, that's in 3 different parts of the permitting process. That's very subjective. It's very, I mean, I don't know what it means.
No, it isn't, Bob. It's very, very objectives, because all of those things are determined by engineering formulas and designs.
So what's the intended project? I mean, Peter, you yourself said it was a little bit vague because, I mean, I understand minimally necessary, but I'm not sure I understand achieve the intended purpose of the project. I mean, that could be
That language is
almost anything. All I'm
verbatim
saying,
used by the
all I'm
Army.
saying on this, Chris, is I feel that what's not in here is a mechanism for, I'll call it transparency, notification, understanding of what's going on down there. And that has been a crux of some of the public consternation. And if we just want to just forget about that, then we forget about that. But that's been the elephant in the room here. And I don't know that we have anything here that addresses sort of the notification to the public, the transparency of the public of what's being approved. That's all.
I'm not.
And if I'm a lone wolf, then that's fine.
Hearing?
No, the 5 funds are on appeal.
Yeah, so, Bob, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so transparency, that issue, does the public know about it? What I was saying is, A, we provide notice, now it's gonna be 1,000 feet,
That's if there's an appeal of it.
if there's an appeal, okay. But the Army Corps maintains a searchable database of pending permits of all activity on the lake. So our permit just comes after, so it's already out there. So there's literally nothing more you can, I mean, if people are having a hard time searching that website, that's a different issue, but that's not, it's out there. Now, if the issue is, well, we don't think that standard's tight enough, well, it is very objective. It is the standard that's baked into the standards that the federal agencies are using, and it is based on, okay, what is necessary for shoreline control? You can't get an inch more than shoreline control. Maybe you'll come up with something better than that after hammering on this for a while. I don't think you will.
Well, okay,
But if you don't, if you think this is ambiguous, how do you solve ambiguity by putting out a rule that you think is ambiguous and then have people come to this council of non-experts and beg for like some kind of construction of something you think is ambiguous? It's not ambiguous, but if you think that you're going to give yourself more leeway by hauling people in front of the council, that's a horrible, toxic precedent we don't do with any other building permit. It's not a policy question. It's an administrative question. Honestly, as much as I care about the lake, what goes on with the people in the town, as has been demonstrated by the shenanigans with the park district, is so much more important. The loss of trust that you get when you create ambiguous rules and you put people through that kind of a process, that's unforgivable. You should never create a situation where a homeowner has to come in here and not knowing what the hell the rules are, and please, please just don't make me look like too much of a jerk in the process. Like, that's a horrible process. So I'm not gonna be here when you guys sort that out, but I sure as hell hope that's not where you end up, because
I don't think any of us want that to
No.
happen.
I don't
the
think that was-
standard is clear. And if you're unclear on it, then you haven't done the homework. You haven't read the federal regulations, because they use the same damn language. If you think there's not transparency, get on the goddamn website for the Army Corps of Engineers and search it. It's there. Okay, so because somebody says, I didn't know, that's different from saying we're trying to hide it or we're engaging in backroom dealing. That's not what this council has done. If you want to beef these standards up, God bless you, do that, but make them clear, have that discussion. But, you know, I feel like there's a lot of consternation because there's so much turmoil in the town, which was created by all this nonsense in the first place. Be smart, take it one step at a time. You've got clear standards, do that. Honestly, if you're talking about a half dozen projects, I mean, and 90% of a half dozen projects, as you've said, don't create a problem, then what are we talking about? What we're talking about is one project. One project that got everybody really keyed up. One project that requires us to sit down and have conversations with the project owner, who, by the way, is willing to engage in those conversations, but that's a separate issue. So I've just, like, there's too much trying to be jammed into very straightforward language. And God help you if you
Well,
create a
okay,
process
well, it
where
says
people have to come in.
Quite honestly, Andy, I take a little objection to some of your comments there. All along here, I have been very clear that my view of the lakefront has nothing to do with one property owner or one public property owner. I feel like for 25 or 30 years, the village, and you yourself said it, you kayak up and down and blah, 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 and you look at the shit show that we have on the lakefront. You said that.
Yeah, and
It's not about one property owner. This is about the lakefront. And all I'm saying is that we're putting something in place, and Chris, you just said, and I thought that before we had a conversation that you thought this would be done in 23, now maybe not in 23, but the longer that this
No, Bob, I didn't,
document
Bob,
is-
Bob, stop right there. I said it wasn't gonna be done in 2 months. And that I would be,
I thought you said
I would be
23, but
surprised if we
It doesn't
finished.
matter. The longer this is in place, the more important it is. That's all. And Andy, I'm not asking to make ambiguous, you know, if the criteria is the criteria, all that would happen would be that staff would say, we've gone to the council, we've gone to the coastal engineer, whatever, it meets our criteria, approval, approved, just like we do all the time, but it would be made public.
We
And
don't
you're saying that you
approve
want,
building permits.
you know, Joe Smith, you know, on the west side of Winnetka, east side of Winnetka, to go to the Army Corps website and find the permits. I have a little different perspective than that. Sorry.
Well, I think one of the points was that it wasn't, that the term minimally necessary, okay, got that to achieve intended purpose of the project. Well, what if the intended purpose of the project is absurd, silly, excessive, whatever. So
A tiki bar,
minimally
yeah,
necessary
50
to
people.
achieve that is, we still don't end up with necessarily what is best for the lakefront, consistent with all the other goals of the village. So that, the vagueness of the, to me, the intended purpose of the project. I don't know if that is, there's better language for that, to better define it, or that has to come down. But to Bob's point, the longer, if this is not gonna be in place for 2 months, but longer,
Kim, what do you really think that we could finish this in 2 months?
no, I,
Really?
not necessarily, but I mean,
Not ever.
okay.
Really? I mean, think of the workload.
The types of projects that are permitted are for purposes of shoreline protection and recreation, and that's it.
So to my point, that's why this
So-
is so important, this temporary one. Because it's not gonna be a quick fix.
Right, but we have, I think, okay, personally, I'm gonna enter the fray here. I think we've established standards that our village engineer and his consultants can wrap their arms around and at least have something where they can give a legitimate review and either denial or approval based on those criteria. There's enough there. By stating that, now, you do make a good point about the purpose of the project. If the purpose of the project is to have a 50-foot diving platform, well, I mean,
And tiki bar, yeah.
That'd be a no.
or that, yeah, I mean,
They
that'd
won't
be a
get
no to
Army
start.
Corps permit. They won't get Army Corps permit approval for that, right?
That would rise to the level of remarkable.
I'm sorry, the level of what?
That would rise to the level of remarkable.
Of remarkable.
And to me, and to maybe to add some level of comfort here is, I understand what the council's looking for as the village engineer as far as the heights of these projects, the needs, the necessities. To Trustee Craig's point, erosion protection and shoreline protection, and potentially maybe a boat launch. That's it. That's what these permits cover, right? We understand that. So we understand, we would take a look at the intent. If there's an application, we wouldn't let somebody over-design for their own specific purpose. That's what the minimal calls for. So we understand, we were trying to keep the breakwaters, groins, if they're proposed at a minimum. We understand the sightline component of it. So I think initially, this just gives me the tools to be able to take a look at these applications and make sure they're reasonable. It's nothing extreme, nothing remarkable. If I saw that, I would seek higher guidance.
That's very helpful, Jim. And-
Okay, that is, yes.
But again, it's what, and this is where we get a little crazy, which is what is remarkable? And what Chris reviews as unremarkable, I looked at and said, it looks pretty remarkable to me. So I guess, I don't know how we make it easier on you to be able to judge that way. I do believe, and what Bob was saying is the lakefront is a different animal. And we learned things about the lakefront we didn't know. Nobody knew, or
Sure.
we had an idea, but we didn't know we had the rights to do. We've changed that, so I get where, and I get Andy's point on this and as well, but I do think that how we bring you a little bit more clarity, as you said, Chris, the scope of the project, what is that, or the intended purpose of the project, that's a good
But
question.
the beauty about engineering and why
Yeah.
people go into it is there are equations that are solved by numbers, and there's answers. And that's all we're asking Jim to do, is run his equations, and determine whether it's the minimum required to get the job done. That's it. But it's numbers. That's the beauty of it. We don't have to sit up here as a bunch of amateurs and say 10 feet tall, or 2 feet tall, or 8 feet wide, or 16 feet wide, or whatever, or limestone, or whatever. Alls we have to do is say, put your math to it and tell us if the project is solved
Right.
by the math or not.
But I think and being you're gonna be one of a key lever, what your idea of remarkable and versus
Sure.
unremarkable. I don't know
Well,
how
he's
you
gonna
use it.
ship everything over
No,
to Baird.
I know what
Yeah,
you're
I
saying,
mean-
but I'm
And
just
I-
curious, that gives people,
So let me add some context to this. So we did some research up and down the shoreline of permits that have been issued by the Army Corps and IDNR in town right now.
right,
And breakwaters and groins, on average, are typically, they range between 3 to 5.5 feet above water elevation right now. That's existing right now, everything that's out there. We're not looking to make it higher. The only exception to that would be Lloyd. Lloyd Beach is 8 feet taller, but it's a different design purpose. When you're designing for a public gathering component, you have to take into a different account. Public safety, different weathering events, what activities are you doing? Lake Forest is another good example. Those breakwaters are higher than your minimal ones that you see of 3 to 5. They're typically higher, and it's to provide protection. Somebody coming by in a boat and wanting to go over the top of a wall and go towards people, there's security reasons that go into that. It's all part of what they look at. So for residential types of permit applications, you're looking at a range, and again, it depends on so many factors. What's the slope? What's the intake? What's the purpose as far as erosion protection of shoreline? You're talking about a range between 3 and 5%, or 5 feet-ish, roughly. So that's what we would be looking at. The coastal engineer would confirm for us if the design meets that requirement. Now, if somebody is proposing to do something excessively higher than that, that would raise a flag for me. I would deny that. And I can say, let's go through the process to understand why.
So
And that'd be all part
you'd
of it.
look at sight lines or
Correct.
the ability for safety and welfare that,
That's all part
are
of the
not
things I'm looking
obscured.
at now.
that
That's
are
in the
blocked.
criteria here.
That's in the criteria, correct.
No, I'm with you. I just want to make sure that as a part
And,
of.
and many times when a certain application comes in, and if it touches on the other areas of expertise of village departments,
Yeah.
for example, fire and police, they would be asked to review, to submit plan review comments to Jim, and Jim would be, his department would be the funnel for that. So we would be gathering feedback from the professional staff so that you end up with a really good accumulation of comments.
And that would include.
Primarily driven by
that
the
would
coastal
include
engineer.
Things like Lloyd Beach as well.
Pardon me?
That would include things like Lloyd Beach
Yeah.
as well. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know if they were consulted. So,
So what I like about this is that it also ensures a consistency of application. You know, I think a lot of times on the North Shore, and I've seen this in my professional job, is that a lot of times village boards can be, or, you know, elected officials can sometimes get nervous about giving up control to an administrative decision. But I think time and time again, there's a consistency because the same people are applying the same principles in approving or reviewing projects. Whether it's the width of a driveway for a fire truck or emergency vehicle, or whether it's anything, right? I think there's a lot of consistency and sophistication that's put into these reviews. So I have no problems with this being at the administrative level for approval.
All right. Peter's got something he wants to
So,
share with respect to what Kim had mentioned earlier about purpose.
yeah, the language that trustee Handler commented on about the intended purpose of the project, I'm not surprised you asked about that. We struggled with that language. That was what we got down. But I think the way to put some parameters on that is to just add to that the intended purpose of the project and consistent with the purposes set forth in section 1578010 of the chapter, which is that first paragraph that we just revised,
Okay.
which is the purpose, which doesn't include a tiki bar or, you know, something, you know, like a 50-foot diving board. So that language then, it does rein it in, so it's not without boundary.
One other little thing. Should point A, should it be 8 points, and the first one is the idea that I thought was so great that you put in here, where the applicant should meet with the village engineer in advance of filing the application to allow them the opportunity to identify any issues? Should that, this sort of seems like the criteria are also,
This is once they've done all, they don't get to this
until they've done that. Okay.
Yep.
So are we resolved on the bring it to council issue or not? Bob, are you okay with it? Or you really want this to come to council every time we have an application?
No, I couldn't really hear what Peter said there, Chris, so I just,
Yeah, I said to tighten up the language, which is repeated a few times in the standards about the project being minimally necessary to achieve the, quote, intended purpose of the project. We just add to that minimally necessary to achieve the intended purpose of the project and consistent with the purposes set forth in the first paragraph of the ordinance, which we just
I like that.
revised.
I like that, Peter. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's really good.
Okay, have you guys been keeping notes?
Yeah, got it.
Okay, let's move to public comment. Is there more? I'm sorry, I didn't want to,
Oh, no.
Rob?
Good.
Tina? Let's move to public comment. Just come on up to the microphone and share your thoughts with us. We're gonna do a sign-in sheet one of these days, but we haven't gotten there yet, so.
That's okay. Hi, I'm Wendy Dury, and I happen to be one of those lakefront properties. So I just want to bring a couple things to the attention. That when you talk about the 500 feet or 1,000 feet, we were never notified at 339 Sheridan to a property south of us. I think it's 329, which was a very big project and impacted a lot on the lakefront. And one of the other classifications back in the day was Corps of Engineer and the DNR. There's a 5-year water line, so something that was not adhered to at the time. So, you know, I guess it's sounding like, because so much, I use the word poppycock has been going on with the village and the Park District stuff, that you guys are actually hearing some of the stuff that the people that live on the waterfront would like you to hear. The other thing, in over 30 years of living in my house, I have never received one thing from the village on what we, the people that live on the waterfront, might think. And so that makes it a little bit hard too, because you guys are making decisions on it, but never asking the people that live there, and maybe you could say the onus is on me to have us come to more meetings for that. But I just think sometimes communication with those most impacted would be really helpful. And the particular thing, when it was 250 feet, our beaches, our 2 private beaches are right next to Dimitri's, which was in 250 feet, but because we're a little unique cul-de-sac, only the people on the south side received that notice. And that was a pretty big project that was very disruptive to 6 homes. So all I'm saying is I'm glad to hear some of these things, and I hope that some of the rules that are coming up that we residents would have to apply to, that you keep that in mind when the project from the Park District comes up this week, along with the amount of money that they're asking for. Just very short, but I appreciate the time, and I think you should hear from more of us.
We agree.
Thank you.
Hello, Katie.
Hi, my name is Katie Stevens, and the one thing that I disagree with what's going on right now is the lake is all of ours. And so public notice by me having to go to the IDNR, I totally disagree with. I think the village should give notice to all of us, particularly with, Ted mentioned 6 lakefronts or whatever. We all deserve a public notice with anything related to a park. And I don't feel like I should go to the IDNR for that. But I'm here because I love our lakefront. You know how I feel. Little did I know, 2+ years later, how much we've learned from the process with the IDNR. I love the lake more than any of you will know. I take photos of all the structures, large and small, and what works. I can see the beach all the way to Waukegan and Gilson, even on a cloudy day. Our views are priceless. You also have the opportunity to go 3 miles into the lake, which many of the jurisdictions around us go. Safety is the key. The size of walls make it difficult in many situations. As you know, kids will be kids. My own husband capsized at Lloyd, and no one could see him as he was pushed by the waves into the rocks. And no, Chris, I did not push him. The height of many of these walls are excessive, and kids will always venture to another side on a paddleboard, a kayak, or swimming. And worse yet, it could be catastrophic, and we would have some liability in that. We need to see that we move forward on the things that you brought up tonight, but I want you to consider the following, and I guess I'm talking to Peter and Andy more specifically that are lawyers. Number 1, Public access. There needs to be public access at every point north and south at the bluff line. It needs to specifically state that. Many people can't walk out further, and for the safety of fire and police, they need to be able to quickly access, not go out, access, and come in. Number 2, oversight, and I'm sorry, I don't know you, I've never met you, it has nothing to do with you, but I do believe with only 3 lakefront properties and the number of parks that we have on the lake, that you are the ultimate, you all are our forefathers, and you are the ones that need to determine what happens on the lake. And I understand that you don't know all the rules yet, but you're gonna learn quickly. Number 3, definition of a public beach. The public's allowed to walk on a beach but not loiter or sit down. However, accreted sand and landfill become public property, and it needs to be defined. Number 4, any building or structure not permitted by the IDNR goes into public property in any way needs to be removed at an owner's expense. Number 5, so the IDNR does not come back and look at these properties, just so you know. So if you find things that are done, they need to be removed at the owner's expense. Number 5, setbacks. This is the big one. Ready? I spoke to Lake Forest, to the engineers, and to the other people in the zoning area, and there is absolutely a setback of 75 feet for all properties in Lake Forest. It includes no pools, no pool houses, no cottages, no construction of any kind can be within 75 feet of the bluff. Wendy and I live across the street from each other, and we had a terrible experience with people that drilled into the bluff. There should be no construction into the bluff. There should be a 75-foot setback for anything on the lake, and this is important to protect the neighbors. We have people going down multiple stories into the bluff, and they look like Marriott hotels. I'm happy to provide you pictures of these, but I'm telling you, we are destroying our own bluff, and that gives weakness to neighboring properties like you can't even believe. Many of them have had broken windows crashing through and needed restoration services. 14 days is not long enough. I can't look every 14 days at the IDNR and the Army Corps, and I would like public notice in a public record by you all from the village. The lake is for all of us. It's different than, I did a garage, Chris, you mentioned a garage. I did a garage right over here on Oak Street, and I asked for a variance and I had to come here. I do not think, I'm sorry, I would respect your opinion, but I have a right as a citizen to have public comment. Finally, revetment works. Property on the North Shore, north of Maple Street, is probably the best example of revetment, of what is necessary. A lot of the lakefront properties that have walls have failed and are not working, and now they're trying to get higher walls because they don't want revetment on their beach, because they don't want to give up their beach. So revetment works, and I thank you very much for keeping the oath. Leave it better than we found it.
Thanks, Katie. Next. Come on up.
Hi, I'm Judy Rao. We live on Fuller Lane. I've learned a lot listening to all of you tonight. I wrote this before, so I'm kind of rethinking some of this, but here goes. First, it's really nice to be in a forum where we can share thoughts and resources and learn more about the important issues and opportunities pertaining to Winnetka's lakefront regulations. Thank you, honestly, for hosting the study sessions and doing your homework. Thanks, too, for taking this step, which I presume is to provide an initial framework, which you've clarified, as we figure out what to do with current and future projects. The last 2.5 years have been a learning curve for many of us here who've been researching the lakefront development issues, and I'm grateful now that the village is weighing in to better understand the issues in your role. I've read your draft and was pleased to see, albeit some of it buried, the terms access, egress, I did read that part, Andy, and sightlines being included as parameters to be considered, and that the need to protect and preserve our coastline and beaches is also highlighted. I also agree with suggestions that perhaps this language should be elevated and expanded to make it more clear, especially in the statement of purpose. What does concern me, however, is the language in this ordinance which seems to vest disproportionate responsibility with one individual, the village engineer. This is not personal. This is just something so massive going through one conduit, to me, lacks transparency, may cause mistrust. I really think that the village council should be involved, and this shouldn't just be something that is subject to an applicant's appeal. Somewhere in this process, the public needs to have an opportunity to state their opinion. I respect you don't want people thinking they're having to plead their case and be a subject of ridicule. That's not the point. I think what's so unique about this is that we're talking about the waterfront properties, and therein is that tension between public and private property, but the beach belongs to everyone, so everyone has a vested interest. Whether they live there or not, they may walk there every day, and it's something they cherish. So how would they know about it if you had this obscure X number of feet to the left and the right should get notice? For the person whose daily walk is there, they wouldn't know. And they might like to know, they might learn from the process, but they should be heard. I respect your technical analysis about some things are policy. I mean, I am listening. But I just may not happen to agree on all that's being said, but I am listening. But I think it's important that the village council have the ultimate say over what happens. From my perspective in our shared journey, we've learned that there are real gaps in permitting and oversight process. We've also learned, in all honesty, that there were real gaps within the village's governance itself as to understanding what relevant laws are available, and I think that's fair. The council has a responsibility to make sure this doesn't happen again and needs to have the final say. The issues at hand are complex and warrant having many eyes review them to avoid making missteps. I can appreciate the time is of the essence with several significant projects in the wind. Nevertheless, I hope you can amend this draft ordinance, and we will all work with you, and I support all of your efforts. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Judy.
Thank you.
Next, please.
Hi, Ted Winchenko again. As always, unprepared comments. So I wanted to touch on a few things that were said here during the meeting because I found them fascinating. Oh, by the way, I'm assuming that we're not talking about site, S-I-T-E lines, but about something else. So I'll, because I don't know what a site, S-I-T-E line is. But the notice issue, right? So yeah, the Corps has a website. You know, it's challenging to search. And of course, as has been pointed out, you'd have to know to search unless you're going to do it every day. And you know, there are a few people that would do something like that. But the IDNR actually has a provision in their in the state administrative code, which has they're supposed to send mailings. Unfortunately, they seem to be hit or miss on whether or not they send out those notices. So perhaps not everyone needs a letter, but it might be a reasonable thing to put up a notice like somewhere where people in the village might see it for things happening on the lake. You know, and 5 feet thing, I don't know if that's really true. I mean, if you look at the construction that happened north of Fisher Lane in the ravine, that thing is massive, and that happened like 10 years ago. And I think this is where, oh, and the last thing that was said, numbers. Okay, there's an old saying that you can torture a number to make it say anything you want. And so while engineering might be based on numbers, that's not to say that it's absolute and exact. So my concern is that, you know, I actually want this to work. I know it's shocking to hear me say that. But I do really want this to work, and I think that the ordinance isn't terrible. I do think it's very vague. I think the idea of minimal and the purpose and all that stuff is open to a lot of interpretation. I would say a couple things. I noticed in there that you put in the words, will not cause environmental or ecological damage to Lake Michigan. So, you know, there are studies out there that would suggest that even dumping non-native sand onto the beach results in ecological damage to the microscopic flora of the lake and ultimately then goes up the food chain. So you might want to retweak that because by that language, pretty much every project that does anything to the lake can or is actually causing ecological damage. And my biggest concern is that a lot of this ordinance seems to be based on what has happened there already. during the last 20 years when there has been no oversight, when people have done whatever they wanted, that is being used as the base point for what we should do going forward. And that, I think, is a concern. Why is the walls that are out there, with the sightlines that are out there now, why are those deemed to be appropriate? You know, I don't see. How are those structures the basis for anything to be used as a comparison to say something is minimal? It really shouldn't be. I think the village should do something. I think we need to be very cautious with how we approach it. And I think the one thing that we could do to this ordinance is to make it clear that existing structures, existing sightlines aren't the basis for what will be considered minimal or appropriate going forward, because those things were done without oversight. Thank you.
Thanks, Ted. Thanks. Anybody else? Hi, Chuck.
First of all, I'd like to thank the staff for putting together this great first step. I think it's wonderful to put it together in such a process that we can talk about it, you know, how we should move forward. I was going to say a number of things, but I would like to add a couple to my prepared remarks. First of all, I agree with Ted that item G really should be S-I-G-H-T, not S-I-T-E. I think that must have been probably a word spelling error. Always adds things that you don't really want. The second thing was the discussion about the purpose clause. There was some discussion there about accelerate the erosion process and alter natural drainage. I think that there are two really big issues in the process of lake shore development, and that is, and they're different, that's bluff stability and sand transport. And I think it would be really helpful to identify those as being separate issues, because they're not the same. And actually, there's yet a second issue, and that is the fact that the lake level rises and falls, and this ordinance needs to take into account that it might fall also, not just it's going to rise and destabilize the bluffs. So there's really two considerations there. Oh, sorry. So back to my prepared remarks. I've already sent you some discussion about some of the vague terms that were in here, so I'd rather just concentrate on one of them tonight, and that is public beach. And I think that's sort of been lurking behind the discussion this evening. What is public and what is not public? And it's the question of property rights and how do they relate to each other. So turning to a possibility here, rather than carping about, all the darkness, how about lighting one candle? I'll give you my idea of how to define public beach. It's not the public recreational beaches, it is the public land in the lake. And I would say that you could define it. This is a possibility. It's probably one that would need greater study, but that would be any land or water that is located lakeward of the ordinary high water mark of Lake Michigan at the time the previous owner purchased the property. And the reason for that is that the IDNR prohibits the transfer of public land to private land by accretion of beaches. Now, you have to know what was there before the current applicant requests the permit, because that beach could have been accreted and would therefore be public. It would not be that current owner's private land because it accreted due to the previous owner's activity on the beach. So it's important to think about the time as well as the actual physical process because of the fact that the lake level varies. And thank you very much for allowing the public comment, and I think it's been a great discussion this evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chuck. Anybody else? Come on up, Colleen.
Hi. Colleen Root. I'm here in my individual capacity as a citizen of the wonderful village of Winnetka, and not with respect to any other taxing governmental body. I'm here to say thank you. It is amazing to see what you have done in such a short period of time to recognize that, yes, the village does indeed have jurisdiction on the shoreline and in the lake, and I would encourage you to quickly implement your temporary proposed ordinance. Attorney Friedman, you and your firm are incredibly awesome.
I really do. I stand in kind of awe at what you have been able to do. I have burdened you all as of 6:22, Mr. Renz, this evening with my written comments, so I won't belabor those. However, I do encourage that if you are going to let an applicant appeal to this body, then I would also encourage that you let citizens, as Trustee Handler and Trustee Dearborn and Trustee Apatow suggested, also use this forum as an additional level of review. And Engineer Bernal, I respect you for hiring a coastal engineer. I'm so excited about that. With respect to the comment that Mr. Winnichenko made, I've learned in the last 2 years that coastal engineering is an evolving science. That what we may see out in our lakefront right now may not be best practices in the future. And I would draw your attention to the Illinois Beach State Park and the experiment that they are doing right now with their artificial reefs, as well as in the state of Florida and some of the other experimental coastal engineering studies that and I'm sure, Mr. Bernal, you're familiar with this. So what we may see that has been constructed previously may not be what I would term best practices, possibly as we move forward. Again, thank you. Just implement this proposed ordinance, get it done. You guys are awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Colleen. Anybody else like to speak?
Hello, David Stevens. You're going to get your full dose of the Stevens tonight. So,
Did she push you off the kayak?
no comment. I want to re-emphasize and maybe even restate something that Mr. Dearborn had said earlier. What we're looking at today is an ordinance that is temporary, that is going to be a stopgap until the work that you've got to do with all your studies to get the proper procedure and process in place. And I can't emphasize enough that I think it would behoove the council to be more on the conservative side in the interim, that if you do have to bring somebody before the council because they have a project, it's something that I'd rather see that than have it go unnoticed. No disrespect to the engineers, but from an aspect of how it would fit into the village, that's not an engineering principle. So I would rather see a more conservative approach in the interim until we get the right process in place. And so that's the comment that I'd like to make. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, I will close public comment on the lakefront regulations issue, and we'll see what we got here. Okay, go ahead.
Do you want me to review the changes?
Yeah.
I think there's consensus on.
Sure. Peter's going to go ahead and review the changes that we've proposed so far. Is your mic on?
Yes, it is. First, in the purpose section, we're going to eliminate or replace the word accelerate with impact. And then at the end of that, we're going to add the language that Andy talked about, and otherwise adversely impact the health, safety, welfare of the village or its residents. We're going to change 500 to 1,000 feet for the notice. And then in the standards, each time it says intended purpose of the project, we'll add to that and consistent with the purposes set forth in section 1578010 of this chapter. Those are the ones that I thought, I sensed we had consensus on, but happy to hear more.
Hmm?
Do we all get notice on parks?
No.
That's crazy.
Well, Katie, I'll talk to Rob about setting up a spot on the website where people can check if they want to see any pending applications relative to lakefront improvements. I think we can get that far with it, but you know, at some point it becomes incumbent on the people in the neighborhood to understand what's going on in their neighborhood and take responsibility for it too.
So we've created, I think we informed council, we created a section on the website about lakefront regulation review. We could put a status of
Pending
pending permits right there and be publicly available. That would be very easy. And then the other aspect would be in terms of notice to council, as soon as we get an application, you know, we would keep you informed regularly. We'd simply let you know if there was a permit application. That's one way to keep you timely informed of what's coming in.
Yeah,
That'd be helpful.
I appreciate all the comments on it, and I also apologize to Bob, I was too harsh. Often I am, it's a professional hazard, but didn't make it okay, Bob. But I'll just say again what my very big concern is, and I think putting the permits on the website, I think, is a reasonable approach. What I'm very concerned about is that the level of heat not be met with every person who wants to put a dock or a deck or any little thing that would just never end. And so I think let's put the permits on there. Let's see how that goes. I think, you know, with the new process, I think you'll find it's going to go better than people are fearing, I hope. But if, you know, there's like a email campaign against every person who posts a permit, right, and they end up on Nextdoor, then I would say
That's a problem.
you got to take that down, right? I mean, so this is like, transparency is viewed as a universal good, and it does do a lot of good if people exercise responsibility, right? And so I think if you put that out there and there's a responsible sort of approach to that by the community, maybe that works. But if people are getting harassed, if they're getting doxxed, if they're getting, like, you know, put out on social media, that needs to come down immediately. And so that's my fear. It's also my fear with, if you create a political process for a building permit process, it's not that I'm not sympathetic to the lakefront, I am, but I frankly care less about the lake than the people who live on it. And that means the people in the community as a whole. And like, if we get into this constant round robin of vitriol, it's not good. And the underlying thing we're trying to do is make the lakefront better. And you do that by saying what the heck it is we want. And you have to decide that. I'm not going to be here for that. So just figure out what you want and, you know, put that out there. But Bob, I'm sorry.
Did we lose Bob? Bob?
No, it's good discussion. Good discussion. I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bob said he's good, for those out there.
I appreciate Andy making those points. And of course, no one wants that. If we get into the situation, I have enough confidence and faith in residents of Winnetka that it has risen to this level of heat, I think, because of non-transparency. I think with this transparency, I have great confidence that, you know, we won't get in that situation. Now, I sure as hell hope we won't get in that situation.
I hope so. I hope that's right.
So I have confidence that it'll go better than we think.
So are we all good with the changes that Peter just recited? Not seeing anything. Give me some help here, guys.
I'm good with the changes that Peter made. I thought they all made sense.
I agree with the changes.
Okay. Kim, are you okay?
I'm okay.
Okay. You think we can move this? Let's give it a try. Okay, we've had the public comments, we've talked about it. Everybody's asked Peter their questions, so I'm gonna ask right now if I can have a motion to introduce ordinance number MC 05-2023 as modified by the items that our village attorney just reviewed.
So moved.
Second.
Voice vote, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. There's step one towards lakefront something, I don't know.
Clarification.
So, good work. And as you folks in the audience see, sometimes things get a little warm up here, but that's okay too, because we're all friends and we all love each other. And we can still have differences of opinion and figure it out while we're sitting here, so.
Because we all love Winnetka.
Right. We're all bound by our common love for the community, so, which is a good thing. All right, well, let's move this along. Item 9, old business, there's none. Item 10, new business, there's none. And at some point, I'm gonna have to have somebody explain to me, what did we just do?
You mean whether it was new business or old business?
Yeah, what business was that?
It's
It
important
felt
business.
very new.
New business is anything that can be added
During the meeting.
Oh, okay, well, whatever. I've never had anything in that spot. Sorry, folks.
And that's been limited by public noticing requirements, so it's a vestige of the past.
We could shorten this agenda up by one item then. Item 11, appointments, none, but I have 3 in the pipeline for our next meeting, so be ready for that. And closed session, thank goodness, there's none tonight. Item 13, may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Voice vote, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
We stand adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for your help.